Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
The moment I stepped out onto the front steps of the school auditorium, squinting into the sun and adjusting the ridiculous square cap balanced on my head, I caught the first glimpse of them. Bright red, gold, and silver balloons bobbing over a sea of parents, siblings, and friends. A bunch so obnoxiously large, it looked like a damn parade float. My breath caught, but only for a second, because I already knew. They weren't for me. I knew it the same way you know a burn's gonna blister or a bruise is gonna swell. Instinctively, silently, and without needing to see the damage. I stood there on the concrete, clenching the little diploma folder in my hands, and watched my parents march past me like I was another face in the crowd, heading straight toward my twin brother, Derek, who hadn't even graduated that day. My mom was beaming, her lipstick too red for a daytime event, calling his name like she was trying to summon Jesus himself back to earth. Dad was right behind her, trying not to spill the sparkling cider from the cheap plastic bottle he'd obviously meant to pop open in front of a crowd. My chest didn't ache. It didn't burn. It didn't even sting. It just went quiet, like that moment before thunder after lightning, right before the crash, when everything in the world seems to wait. And I just stood there, watching as my family celebrated a 20-year-old intern offer like it was the goddamn Nobel Prize, while I, the first in the family to graduate high school with a 4.0, class valedictorian, and with something far heavier than a diploma tucked in my bag, stood invisible. Maybe I should have said something. Maybe I should have shouted their names, waved my cap in the air, or pointed to the gold cord around my shoulders, but I didn't. I just walked down the steps slowly, heels clicking with purpose, and passed them while they were mid-photo shoot, my dad holding the way to go balloon so it didn't block Derek's face. I smiled, not because I was happy, not even because I wanted to pretend. I smiled because I had something better than a speech, something better than applause. And in that moment, I finally understood the value of silence when you know you're holding a royal flush. You know, it's funny. People always say high school is where you find yourself. But for me, it was more like where I learned to hide myself. Not because I didn't know who I was, but because I learned really early that in our house, the louder story won. Derek, from the day we were born, was the headline. He walked earlier, talked louder, ran faster, and every time I matched him or beat him at something, it was brushed off like I was just trying to compete. I wasn't. I was just trying to exist in a space that was never built for me. I won the spelling bee in 5th grade. Mom said, "That's great, sweetie," then turned around and asked Derek how football practice went. I got accepted into the STEM summer program in 7th grade. Dad said, "Wow, impressive," then asked Derek if he needed help fixing the handlebars on his bike. And when Derek got his first internship interview, the house lit up like Christmas morning while I was sitting at the kitchen table, silently opening an envelope from Stanford. They never asked what was inside. So I learned to keep things to myself, not because I didn't care, but because it hurt less than handing them gold and watching them trade it for glitter. But I wasn't bitter. Not really. I was patient. And if there's one thing they never expected from me, it was that I'd wait 18 years for the perfect moment to say everything without opening my mouth. Now here's the part I want you to think about, really think about. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you knew you could either scream or stay quiet, and somehow silence would say more than 1,000 words ever could? Because as I walked across that lawn, past the line of proud parents with their cameras and their congratulatory bouquets, all I could think was, this is the moment. Not when they cheer, not when the principal shakes your hand, not even when they call your name over the loudspeaker. The moment is when you choose not to need them, when you realize you've already won without their applause. I didn't rush, I didn't stop. I just kept walking until I reached the edge of the crowd, under the shade of a tree where no one was looking, and I opened my bag. In my, between a granola bar and a crumpled napkin from lunch, was the envelope I'd been waiting to give her. Thick paper, Harvard crest, one line in bold. "We are pleased to inform you, I didn't need a party, I didn't need balloons. I just needed that 1 second, when I would hand my mother the letter and watch her world rearrange itself in complete silence. But I didn't give it to her yet. Not then. Not while they were clapping and laughing and hugging my brother like he'd just won a damn Oscar. No, I waited. Because if you're going to set a match, you better make sure the room's soaked in gasoline. I zipped the bag shut and smiled again. A real smile this time. The kind you save for the finale. There's a special kind of ache that doesn't arrive with screaming matches or slammed doors. Not the loud kind of hurt you can point to and say, "There, that's where it broke." But the kind that settles into your bones so slowly and so quietly that one day you just wake up and realize that being invisible has become second nature, like breathing. And by then it's too late to remember when you actually started holding your breath. That's how it was growing up in our house. One where the walls echoed with praise, but somehow only when Derek walked through the room, where my report cards were neat stacks tucked away in drawers, and his C+ in chemistry came with a dinner celebration and a round of backslaps from Dad, like he'd just cracked the damn human genome. It wasn't that they hated me. That would have been easier to swallow. No, they just overlooked me, like a corner lamp that always works, so you forget it's there until the bulb finally burns out. There's this one memory I can't seem to shake, not because it was the worst, but because it was so ordinary. 8th grade science fair. I built a working model of a hydroelectric generator using recycled water bottles, copper wire, and a tiny LED light that actually turned on when the water flowed. I stayed up for 3 nights finishing it, hands cramping from winding coils and glue burns on my fingertips. Derek slapped together a volcano using baking soda and red dye, and forgot to label the continents on his poster board. I won first place. He didn't place. But on the ride home, Dad said, "Not bad, sport," and handed Derek the aux cord. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom said, "Oh, Derek, you'll get it next year," before reminding me to bring in the groceries. The trophy sat on the kitchen counter for one day before it moved to my bedroom shelf, where no one ever mentioned it again. It would have been laughable if it didn't happen in every version of the same scene, me exceeding, them applauding him, the applause echoing in my direction but never quite touching me. It became so routine that even teachers started to notice. Ms. Bartlett, my high school English teacher, once asked me during a parent-teacher conference if I was okay at home, not because I had bad grades or behavior, but because I always looked surprised when someone complimented me. I remember blinking at her, confused, then laughing because I didn't even know what that was supposed to feel like. Complimented? Like genuinely? It's not that Derek asked for it. That would make him easier to hate, but he soaked it in like sun through a window pane, warm and effortless, and he never once turned around to wonder why I stood in the shade. He didn't notice when Mom skipped my art show for his baseball practice, or when Dad forgot my orchestra recital, but managed to get off work early for Derek's D-line tryouts. He didn't even notice last fall, when I won a statewide writing contest, and the certificate came in the mail addressed to Ms. Danielle Hartley, and he handed it to me like junk mail, then asked if I'd seen his car keys. So when the big day came, graduation day, and I saw that ridiculous bundle of balloons bouncing above their heads like a damn clown convention, I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just kept walking, step after step, rehearsing the moment in my head where I would finally hand her the letter, not to gloat, not even to be recognized, but just to break the cycle, to put a crack in the glass and say, "Look, I've been here all along." But before I could reach that moment, before the letter could even feel warm in my palm, something unexpected happened. As I walked past the admin building toward the back of the field, where the seniors were gathering in their caps and gowns, Ms. Reynolds, our guidance counselor, caught sight of me. Her face flickered in that specific way adults do when they're both confused and concerned, like something didn't add up, and she waved me over gently, shielding her eyes from the sun as she tilted her head. "Danielle," she said slowly, voice soft but pointed, "I thought your family was sitting in the front row. Didn't I see your parents come in earlier?" I nodded, not because it was true in the way she meant it, but because it was true enough. They had shown up. They had made an appearance. Just not for me, not in the way that mattered. She looked at me for a second longer than was comfortable, her gaze moving from my gold cords to the sash I wore for academic excellence, then back to my face. "You okay?" she asked, and the question landed harder than I expected. I smiled again, that same goddamn smile I'd learned to master in middle school, the one that meant, "Don't worry about me," while everything inside me itched to scream. "Yeah," I said lightly. "I'm fine. I guess they're just excited about Derek's internship." And she nodded, because what else could she do? She wasn't my mother. She couldn't fix what 18 years had hardened. But as I walked away, I felt her eyes still on my back, like she knew something was off, like she could feel the imbalance hanging in the air. And maybe that was the first time I realized that people were starting to notice, that all the years of quiet resilience, of being the reliable daughter, the one who never caused trouble or asked for attention, had finally made me visible, not to the ones I wanted, but to someone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep going. Because what my parents didn't know, what they'd never cared enough to ask, was that I hadn't just been accepted into Harvard. I'd been offered a full ride, 4 years, room, board, tuition, everything. And I'd turned down other schools too, big names, places people would kill to get into. But I'd waited to make the Harvard reveal until this very day. Not because I needed to prove something, not even because I wanted to show them up. I waited because they always cheered for him. And now I wanted to see what silence would look like when it had to swallow their own ignorance whole. There's a strange kind of satisfaction in being underestimated for so long that people forget to even look in your direction, because when you finally do something remarkable, they don't see it coming, and that moment of stunned silence, that pause where their world stumbles, is more rewarding than a standing ovation ever could be. I stood there behind the row of seniors in blue gowns and gold cords, all of us shifting from foot to foot in the heat. And as the principal took the mic and began reading names, I glanced toward the bleachers where my parents sat, their heads turned toward Derek, like he was the damn guest of honor, instead of the sibling who wasn't even graduating that day. My father had a plastic champagne flute in one hand and his phone in the other, recording Derek making small talk with someone's uncle while my mother adjusted her hair, trying to look perfect in photos she'd never frame. My name was fourth from the end, a choice made intentionally by the administration, because I wasn't just graduating. I was closing the ceremony as valedictorian, and they wanted to save what they called the best for last. Though in my head, I'd renamed it the final disappointment. When the principal finally cleared his throat and raised the paper with the final names, I heard a few murmurs ripple through the crowd as he smiled and said, "And last but certainly not least, our top graduate, class valedictorian, and recipient of the Presidential Scholar Award, Danielle Hartley." The applause wasn't deafening, not because people weren't impressed, but because most didn't know who I was. I hadn't spent the last 4 years campaigning for popularity or showing off in classrooms. I wasn't on any sports team, didn't lead the drama club, and never sat at the loud table in the cafeteria. I did my work, exceeded expectations, and went home. I was the kind of student who made teachers proud and classmates curious, the kind whose name was whispered just loud enough to stir interest, but never loudly enough to command attention. So when my name echoed through the speaker system, I looked toward my parents automatically, like muscle memory, just to see if, by some miracle, they'd looked up, maybe paused their celebration long enough to notice that the daughter they'd been ignoring for years was being celebrated by everyone else. But their heads didn't turn. My mom was already opening the bottle of cider. My dad was aiming his camera at Derek. And Derek was watching the crowd, not the stage, like he was still the most important person in the room. I walked across the stage with deliberate calm, each step measured, not hurried, because I wanted to feel every inch of that moment, even if I was the only one acknowledging it. The principal shook my hand and whispered, "You deserve this." And I felt the words land like tiny anchors in my chest, simple, honest, and so rare that I almost wanted to hug him. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and accepted the small folder, the symbolic paper that meant far less to me than the sealed envelope still tucked inside my bag. By the time I made it back to my seat, 2 rows of students were already talking about post-grad parties, who was driving where, which after prom events were still happening. And for a second, I was just another teenager surrounded by buzzing plans and restless excitement. But deep down, I wasn't thinking about parties or photos or even the weight of the honors I just collected. I was thinking about timing. See, that's the thing about revenge. The satisfying kind. The kind that doesn't come from screaming matches or dramatic public scenes, but from choosing the exact moment when the people who never saw you suddenly have no choice but to stare. And for me, that moment was ticking closer by the second. When the ceremony ended and the bleachers began to empty, students flooded into the grassy field, parents chasing after them with cameras, shouting instructions, hugging, crying, taking selfies with smiling kids in robes. It was chaos in the most American way possible, all streamers and sweat and congratulations. And in the middle of it, I saw them, my parents, still clapping, still glowing, still pointing their phones at Derek, as if he were the one who had just been handed the keys to a new life. I watched from a distance as they posed next to him with the balloons. My mother brushed something from his shoulder like she was straightening a prince's collar. My dad said something that made Derek laugh. They didn't glance around, didn't scan the crowd, didn't wonder why their daughter hadn't come over. And so I let them cheer. I let them believe, just for a little while longer, that they were clapping for the right child. Because there's something poetic about allowing someone to be completely, foolishly wrong right before you drop the truth on them, like a piano from a rooftop. I let them take photos, make toasts, post captions about how proud they were of our son, the future of tech. And I let it build. Because if you're going to deliver news that rattles a person's entire sense of reality, you don't do it in the middle of a ceremony. You wait until the laughter dies down, until the crowd thins out, until the only sounds left are the ones that no one can talk over. That moment came about 30 minutes later in the school parking lot, as the sun started dipping low behind the field and families began piling into their SUVs and minivans. Derek was loading his balloons into the back seat. My mother was on her phone, posting pictures with an overly dramatic caption about our bright star. My dad was opening the last bottle of cider, offering a toast to no one in particular. That's when I walked up, quiet and measured, diploma in one hand, the envelope in the other. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say hello. I just stood in front of them until my mother finally looked up, her face lighting up in that fake, tight way she reserved for polite moments. "Oh, there you are," she said, like I'd just wandered off to the restroom and missed something minor. And without blinking, without smiling, without offering a single explanation, I held out the envelope and said, "Thought you might want to know who Harvard really accepted." Then I handed it to her, turned around, and walked away before she even opened it. Because that, right there, was the moment I'd been waiting for. And I didn't need to see her face to know exactly how hard it landed. There are moments in life that don't need volume to make themselves unforgettable. Moments that arrive like a pin drop in a cathedral, so small in sound, yet so massive in effect, that everything afterward feels quieter, heavier, and strangely more real. And as I stood there in the fading light of the school parking lot, with my family still riding high on the delusion that Derek had somehow stolen the spotlight of the day, I realized I had finally reached that moment. The one I had carried in the back of my mind for years, polishing it with every dismissive glance, every ignored success, every time they cheered for him like I was background noise. And it didn't feel like revenge exactly, not the sharp, bitter kind that cuts both ways, but something slower, something deeper. A reckoning, perhaps, delivered not with a scream, but with the quiet rustle of thick envelope paper sliding from my hand to hers. My mother didn't understand immediately. That was clear from the way she blinked at the envelope, holding it between two fingers like it was a parking ticket she hadn't earned, a mistake someone had handed her. Her face, still flushed from posing for photos, faltered just slightly, a flicker of confusion behind her perfectly mascaraed eyes, and then she looked up at me, her lips parting in a question that never made it out. Because deep down, some part of her knew. Some instinct buried beneath years of practiced indifference and favoritism stirred to life and whispered that something had shifted, that the narrative they had clung to so tightly might not survive what was about to unfold. Derek, for once, stopped moving. The balloons, still bouncing lazily in the warm breeze, tugged against the back seat as he stood frozen beside the car, his grin slipping away piece by piece. My father, half turned with the bottle of cider dangling in his grip, narrowed his eyes and stepped forward slightly, glancing between me and my mother, probably preparing some joke to cut the tension, to laugh off whatever I had handed her with that classic dismissive charm he'd mastered over the years. But no one spoke, not yet. The seal on the envelope was already broken. I'd opened it weeks ago, of course. But it didn't matter. What mattered was what was inside. And more than that, what it meant. It wasn't just a letter. It was a dismantling of everything they thought they knew. It was proof that while they were busy clapping for the wrong child, the one who always spoke louder and shined brighter under their particular light, I had been building something stronger in the dark, and now it was here, unfolding in real time, undeniable and irreversible. My mother finally slid her finger into the envelope and pulled out the letter. Her eyes moved quickly at first, trained by years of skimming schedules and school memos, but then they slowed, her lips tightening as she read the opening lines, the header with Harvard's crimson crest, the salutation, the words, "We are pleased to offer you admission." And then further down, the lines that confirmed it wasn't just admission. It was full funding, recognition, invitation into an academic future they had never asked me about because they had never cared enough to imagine I had one. She didn't say anything. She just sat down. Right there on the curb beside the back wheel of our family's SUV, the balloon still straining gently behind her. The letter trembling in her hands like it weighed more than a single sheet of paper ever should. It was almost funny how the silence that had been mine to carry all these years now found its way into her throat, pressing down on her voice until there was nothing left to say. My father, still standing, took a step closer, and then another, peering over her shoulder at the letter, squinting like maybe he could rewrite it with his eyes, like maybe it said something different if you read it twice. And Derek, poor golden boy Derek, opened his mouth like he wanted to protest, to crack a joke, to deflect the shame beginning to bloom hot on his cheeks, but no words came. For the first time in as long as I could remember, he didn't know what to say. It wasn't the kind of revenge you rehearse with fantasy arguments in the shower or imaginary showdowns in your head. It wasn't about yelling or accusations or demanding apologies. It was the kind of revenge that happens when someone finally sees the truth and can't look away. When they realize that everything they celebrated, everything they prioritized, was just smoke and noise, and what they dismissed had been the real victory all along. I didn't wait for questions. I didn't give them a speech. I didn't need to. The letter said everything. It said I was more than they'd allowed me to be. It said I had done it without them. And most importantly, it said that from now on, I didn't owe them my silence, my patience, or my presence. As I turned and walked away, I could feel the shift behind me, not just in posture or expression, but in the air itself, in the slow, crushing weight of realization that was settling over all of them. The celebration was over, and the wrong kid had gotten the balloons. And me, I didn't feel triumphant or angry or even sad. I just felt done. Done playing small, done shrinking myself into the spaces they left for me, done waiting to be chosen in a family that never really saw me. The girl they overlooked had just handed them the one thing they couldn't ignore, and now all they could do was sit with it. There's a peculiar kind of exhaustion that doesn't stem from the body, but from the soul. A slow dripping fatigue that settles deep into your bones after years of biting your tongue, lowering your gaze, and smiling politely in rooms where your presence is acknowledged only as a formality, rather than a choice. And as I walked away from that parking lot, my heels digging slightly into the soft edge of the grass, my back to the people who spent my childhood applauding a shadow, I felt the full weight of that exhaustion lift. Not all at once, but gradually, like a knot finally uncoiling after being pulled tight for far too long. The sky above me had turned that muted lavender of early evening, and with every step I took toward the exit, the sound of their silence behind me became the most satisfying applause I'd ever heard. I didn't turn around. I didn't flinch. I didn't check to see if my mother was crying, or if my father had finally closed his mouth, or if Derek had stormed off in frustration, because the truth is, I didn't care. Not in the indifferent, cold way people like to claim, when they're still secretly desperate to be seen, but in the final, irreversible way that comes when you've handed someone the truth on a silver platter, and they finally choke on the fact that they were never the hero in the story. They were just a background character in someone else's rising arc. For 18 years, I'd been told, subtly and persistently, that my worth was conditional, that praise belonged to the loudest voice in the room, that love in our house was currency. And Derek always had the higher value. I wasn't supposed to win. I wasn't even supposed to try. But I had, and I did it quietly, with purpose, never for them, but in spite of them. And the final irony was that the very silence they had always mistaken for weakness had become my sharpest weapon. I walked the edge of the lot until I hit the sidewalk, the buzz of post-graduation chaos still humming in the background, families laughing, cars honking, parents yelling over cameras and kids yelling for rides. But it all sounded distant, like a movie soundtrack to someone else's life. I had no one waiting to take my picture, no father holding open the car door, no mother fixing my hair or wiping mascara from the corners of my eyes. But for the first time, that absence didn't sting. It felt clean, it felt earned, because I had given them one last opportunity to show up for me, not with confetti or applause, not even with words, but with acknowledgement. And they had missed it, like they missed everything else that mattered. You know what they never asked me, not once during the entire celebration or the months leading up to it? Not where I wanted to go, not what I wanted to become, not what excited me, terrified me, kept me up at night. They never asked who I was beneath the grades and the silent achievements. Derek was always the story. His path, his interests, his minor accomplishments inflated into milestones, while I was the footnote, the supporting character whose lines were edited out before the final cut. And it's not just the praise they denied me. It's the curiosity, the effort, the basic human interest that tells a child, I see you. When I made the decision to accept Harvard's offer, I didn't do it for prestige or even for the future it promised. I did it because, for once, I wanted to make a choice that had nothing to do with what anyone else expected. Stanford had been an option. MIT had sent their letter 2 weeks earlier, but Harvard was the one place Derek had never touched. He hadn't applied. He hadn't visited. It was, by some strange alignment of fate, a part of the world he hadn't reached first. And that was enough. I wanted to claim something untouched, uncontaminated by comparison or competition. A piece of the map I could call entirely mine. I never told them I got into other schools. I never told them I'd published a research paper. I never told them I'd been tutoring half the math team since sophomore year, or that I volunteered every Saturday at the downtown library's youth program. I let them believe what they wanted, let them build their world around the version of me they found easiest to ignore, because I knew the truth would hit harder when it came all at once, wrapped in university letterhead and dropped like a stone into the center of their carefully curated story. And now that it had, I realized something even more important than the moment itself. I realized I was done, not just with them, not just with the roles we'd been assigned and played for so long, but with the entire game. The endless race to prove myself to people who were never really watching, the quiet contests, the strategic silences, the hidden victories. I was done competing with a ghost, the ghost of the daughter they never saw, the version of myself I'd trimmed and molded to fit into the tiny, shrinking box they labeled second best. It doesn't matter if they change now. It doesn't matter if they start posting my achievements online, or if my mother suddenly wants to visit Cambridge in the fall, or if my father tries to bring up my GPA at barbecues. like he's always been proud. The moment has passed. The damage was done, and I've stepped out of its shadow. This story doesn't end with reconciliation. It doesn't end with forgiveness or a group hug in the driveway. It ends with truth, with the unspoken, undeniable weight of it. And with me walking away under a sky that doesn't care whether they follow. Because the hardest part about letting go isn't the silence that follows. It's realizing that silence was always yours to fill. And finally, after years of being quiet for their comfort, I chose to use it for my own peace.